will now be recorded.
In today's session, we will focus on developing OData service using BAPI with mapping technique. So let me start with this particular simple OData service using BAPI with mapping technique. So the first point here is OData services can be developed in two ways. One is with BAPI and second is without BAPI. OData services can be developed in two ways. One is with BAPI, another is without BAPI. So we are going to understand both the techniques. In today's session, we will try to go with first one, that is by using BAPI concept. In today's session, we are going to discuss with BAPI technique inside OData service. So that means today we are going to develop OData service with BAPI with mapping technique. So first what you need to do is step one. We need to analyze the BAPI. For example, I want to use BAPI flight get list. For example, I want to use BAPI flight get list. So whenever you want to use a BAPI inside OData service, first we need to analyze the BAPI with respect to what is the input of a BAPI, what is the output of a BAPI. What are the input parameters of BAPI, what are the output parameters of that particular BAPI flight get list in this case. That is, recognize the input parameters of BAPI and recognize the output parameters of BAPI. So according to step one, we need to analyze BAPI. Analyzing BAPI is nothing but just recognize what are the input parameters and what are the output parameters of the BAPI which you want to use. So we can do this analysis of a BAPI under SE37T code. We can do that here. So let me do that. I want to utilize BAPI flight get list inside this application. So before using that, try to open SE37 and try to analyze it. So you can see let me open SE37 T code, and here you can provide the BAPI name which you want to analyze. I want to use BAPI flight get list. BAPI flight get list. So you can provide that BAPI BAPI name and just click on display here. Provide BAPI name and just try to display, and you can see under source code the code is already implemented here. Under source code, this is a standard BAPI given by SAP and the code is already implemented here. The functionality is implemented. You can see that. So, the entire functionality with select query is already implemented inside this. You can notice that somewhere here. So some select query is already implemented inside this BAPI, and they're trying to implement some functionality by using input parameters and output parameters of that BAPI. So that means if you are using a BAPI, then you need not write the code at OData level, because BAPI contains the coding. If the BAPI is already available with the complete functionality, then directly we can consume that inside OData, and at OData level we can just apply mapping technique. So the functionality is implemented, but the most important here is what are the input parameters. You can see input parameters are airline, destination from, destination to, max rows. So there are 4 input parameters, and if you closely observe, all these parameters are optional. They are not mandatory parameters, they are optional for this BAPI. So this is important for us. There are several parameters. These are all input parameters of a BAPI in this case. And in our example, I want to utilize this airline. If you want, you can use other options, but I want to utilize airline as the input parameter while developing OData service. Now similarly, you can see under export nothing is available, but if you go to table section, under table section there are some more parameters, and flight list is the main parameter for holding the list of flight records. Under same BAPI, you can see BAPI flight get list. Under this, you can see there are several output parameters, and the most important here is flight list. It is going to hold collection of flight records or list of flights. So I want to utilize this output parameter here. First, let me save this. So you can use these things for input purpose, you can use these things for output purpose. processed and how the output will be delivered. So let me execute by pressing F8. So in this case, I'm trying to provide some input airline ID, for example, LH. And if I click on execute, now you can see under flight list, we are able to get 84 records here. You can see that. This is the output of so-and-so input according to airline LH. Now similarly, you can see here, for this so-and-so BAPI, if I provide airline as LH, that as input, and here we are getting output with 84 records here. There are 84 output records, you can notice that. Now let me give some other input here. You can go back. I'm providing AA, American Airlines, AA as airline ID, and if you execute, now you can see we are able to get 33 output records for so-and-so input. And output records are available under flight list here. You can notice that. Take this. So here airline is AA. We are using that as input, and we are getting flight list output with 33 output records here. Just notice that, because all these things will play important role while testing OData service also. Similarly, let me try one more input here. For example, airline as UA, United Airlines. If I execute, now we are getting flight list with 68 output records. So you can see that, United Airlines. So if you closely notice this, airline UA, and you're getting flight list with 68 output records here in this case. But as I said, input is not mandatory. Input is not mandatory because all these input parameters are optional. Say for example, if I provide airline input as blank, I'm trying to provide airline ID as blank because these are all input parameters which are optional. So when you provide some airline as blank, and if you execute, we are able to get all 408 records under flight list. If the input is blank, if the input is not provided, then we are getting all output records under flight list, and the count is 408 here. So you are getting all the records. American Airlines, Go Air Airlines, Delta Airlines, Japan Airlines, etc., etc. So let me just take this before we proceed. Here you can see airline is blank, input is optional, so I made it blank. So for that we are getting 408 output records here. So by utilizing this behavior, I want to develop OData service. I want to develop an application by utilizing this behavior, by utilizing this BAPI. So what I want to do, my requirement can be like this. The requirement can be like this. The front end SAP UI5 or Fiori application. Front end can be SAP UI5 or Fiori app. Under UI5 Fiori app, we can provide some input form with, for example, enter airline and another input. If you want, you can provide that, but I just want to take, for example, enter airline as one of the input here, and when I click on get data button, I can display output, and output can be displayed under table format. So the requirement can be like this. When you develop front-end application, the application can look like this. Input form, input field, and you can say get data button, and there is a table output here. You can expect table output. So I want to develop a front-end app something like this by utilizing that BAPI which we have analyzed. So here I am expecting table with flight list in this case. So what you need to do for this, you can develop OData service here. We can develop OData service. Under OData service, what we can do is we can define some input here. We can define some input, for example, airline ID. And we can define some output. That is, I want to use entity set, that is flight set. I want to use entity set, that is flight set, for output purpose. And these things can be defined at OData level. And this OData service will access, in this example, OData service will access a BAPI, that is BAPI flight get list. In this case, OData service will access BAPI flight get list. This already contains the database functionality for fetching the data. And under this BAPI already input is available as airline. And the functionality is already implemented. Select query is already implemented to fetch the data. Under BAPI, there is an output parameter, that is flight list. So, technically what happened? What happens here is the input coming from front-end app will be transferred to OData service here. The input from front-end app will be transferred to OData service. And OData service can pass that input to a BAPI which you have consumed. OData service can pass the same input to the BAPI which you have consumed. Now, after executing your functionality here, in this example, the functionality is already available under a BAPI. So after executing that select query, I can say the output will be transferred from BAPI to OData service. BAPI to OData service. And OData service can pass that output to the front-end screen element table. It can be UI5 or it can be Fiori. So, if you analyze step by step, this is how the data flow can happen for the service which we are going to implement in today's session. So, if you closely observe, the front-end app is accessing OData service, and OData service is accessing BAPI flight get list. So from the front end, we are passing some input here that will reach OData service, and OData service will pass that same input to a BAPI here. After executing select query, the output from BAPI is transferred to OData service, and OData service will send that output to the front-end table or front-end graph or front-end microchart, whatever. So, let me save this requirement diagram. So, in order to achieve this type of scenario, first we need to concentrate on developing SAP OData service. So, in today's session, what we are going to do, we are going to discuss how OData service can be developed and how we can access BAPI inside OData. That we are going to discuss in today's session. And in the coming days, you will understand how to develop front-end applications. Okay, now, so according to step 1, I want to use input parameter as airline and output parameter as flight list. Step 2 is under SEGW transaction code, create OData service project. You can just open SEGW, then click on create, provide project name, provide some description, then save it in package in real time. So let me do that. SEGW, and there is a create symbol here. You can click on create, provide some project name. Provide some project name, description, and you can save it in package in real time. So as I said, you'll get all these things like data model, service implementation, runtime artifacts, service maintenance. So you'll get all these 4 important folders. this, provide some description and save it in package. Step 3. Step 3 is create entity type and entity set under data model folder. Create entity type, entity set under data model folder. That is, just right click on data model, then import DDIC structure, provide entity type name, for example flight, provide ABAP structure. In this case I am using BAPI SFL DAT. That is a structure which contains the fields related to that particular BAPI. BAPI SFL DAT is a structure which contains the fields related to the BAPI which we have analyzed. So I want to import the same fields into our OData service while creating entity type and entity set. You can import fields from this. Into OData service. Why we are using BAPI SFL DAT? Because this is a structure which contains all the fields which are utilized inside the BAPI. The same fields I want to import into OData service. So click next, and here you need to select checkbox to create entity set. In this case, entity set becomes flight set. Entity type is flight, so entity set becomes flight set. Entity type is flight, so in this case entity set becomes flight set. You can click on next, select required fields, then you can click next and select at least one field as key field. For example, I want to use airline ID as a key field. At least one field must be key field. In this case, I want to use airline ID as key field. Then click finish. So that is step 3. In step 3, we are going to create entity type, entity set. So let me do that. Right click data model, import from DDIC structure. Provide entity type name, for example flight, and provide ABAP structure BAPI SFL DAT. This is a structure which contains the fields utilized inside BAPI, the same structure we are trying to use for importing the fields in OData. Now there is a checkbox, you can create entity set along with entity type. So here we are providing entity type, ABAP structure, entity type, in this case it is becoming flight. We have provided flight, so entity set becomes flight set. Just remember that. Now let me proceed. You can click next. And you can see there are fields under this particular structure, BAPI, SFL, DAT. It contains several fields like airline ID, airline, connect ID, flight date, airport from, city from, airport to, city to, etc., etc. Price, currency, departure time, arrival time. So all the list of fields which are used inside BAPI, the same fields I am trying to import into OData service. So you need not select all the fields. Whichever fields are important for you, you can select those fields. I just want to utilize these fields. Then click next. If you want, I can give this screenshot. So from this BAPI, we are trying to add the fields into OData service. Now you can just click on next here, and it is asking for key field. So at least one field must be key field. I am providing airline ID as key field. I am selecting airline ID as key field, then click on finish. So because of that, on saving, you can see entity type, and there is entity set. Entity type contains all these fields which we have selected. Now we got this. So you can utilize these fields in the front end which are part of this entity type. When you develop the front end application in the coming days, what we do is we try to utilize these fields. In the front end, we have to configure these fields in the front end. And if you want to collect the data, you can collect data from flight set. That is nothing but entity set. So whichever fields are part of entity type, you can configure in the front end application development. And if you want to collect output records, then you can configure entity set, because it holds collection of records at runtime. Entity set holds collection of records at runtime. So you can configure that entity set in the front end to display the data. And as I said, entity type is just collection of fields with data type and length. Entity type is collection of fields with data type and length. So you can take the fields from entity type. If you want to configure the fields in the front end, and you can collect the data into front end by configuring entity set. Okay, now when you go to front end, you will understand what are OData fields, what are the entity sets, how to use it. When we go to front end, we can discuss more on that. But let us focus on OData and BAPI consumption here. So what's the next step? Step 4. What we need to do now is define mapping between OData service and BAPI, in this case BAPI flight get list. Step 4, we need to define mapping between OData service and BAPI, in this case BAPI flight get list. So how to do this? You can see, if you go to service implementation folder, service implementation folder will display the entity set here. Under entity set, I want to consume BAPI and I want to map it with get entity set related method. I want to consume BAPI and I want to define that mapping with get entity set method to fetch the data. So you can right click here and map to data source. Map to data source. Data source can be BAPI or RFC. So under service implementation, for every entity set, as I said, there will be CRUD methods. In that, get entity set is one of the method I want to utilize. And map to data source. Now you can provide BAPI whichever you want to consume and then proceed further. So let me proceed here. Right click and map to data source. And here you will get type. You can provide type as remote function call. BAPI is also a remote function module. BAPI is also internally a remote function module. So you can select the type as remote function call and provide BAPI name, BAPI flight get list. Provide BAPI name, BAPI flight get list. So while mapping, you can define whether BAPI is in the same server or it is available in the remote server. That you can define here by selecting either local or remote. In my case, I am using the BAPI available in a local system. So provide that type as remote call even though it is local. Even though it is local, the type must be remote function call for your BAPIs. It can be local or remote, but when you are accessing a BAPI, the type must be remote function call. Type of data source and name of data source. If your BAPI is available under some other server, then you can select remote option and you can proceed further. Now we are providing this. Let us click on continue here. So when you click on continue option, you'll get this screen for mapping purpose. If you closely observe the screen, left side there are OData fields, right side there are BAPI related fields now. Left side OData fields now, right side BAPI related fields. First let me write this step here. Expand service expand entity set. In this case, flight set is our entity set. Just right click on get entity set query option and select map to data source. Map to data source option. Then provide local. If you select local, you need not provide RFC destination. If you select remote, you have to provide RFC destination. If you select local, then RFC destination is not required. If you select remote, RFC destination has to be provided. And whatever it may be, provide data source type as remote function call. Provide data source type as remote function call and provide data source name, that is nothing but this BAPI flight get list. Then click on continue. Now you will get this screen with that procedure. You'll get left side OData fields, right side BAPI related fields. So if you closely observe here, these are OData fields, left side, and right side you can see BAPI related fields. And if you closely observe, there is airline which is available twice under input and one in output. Airline at BAPI level, it is available twice, one for input, another for output here. So what I'll do is I'll add one more option at OData level to satisfy this. At OData level also, I'll try to use one more field which will be mapped to one to input and another to output. So for that reason, you can see I can click on plus symbol here. I can click on plus symbol. I can select the fields from our entity type. I want to select some field from entity type, so you can select this small icon. I'm selecting airline ID. Once again, I'm selecting airline ID. One, I want to use it for input, another I want to use it for output. So, now what you need to do? In this screen, here you can use a mapping between these things. So we have to establish input mapping here now from OData service to a BAPI. And we'll try to use all output mappings from flight list to the remaining fields of OData. So you can perform output mapping here. Between each field, you can do this. So from BAPI flight list, we are maintaining output mapping with OData service. Similarly, all the fields you can select here. Airport from. And something like city to. Whichever fields you want to utilize, for those fields you can maintain mapping. Price. Currency, etc. So first field we are using for input purpose, remaining fields we are using it for output purpose. First field, in this case we are using it for input, and the remaining fields we are using here for output purpose. So ultimately under this screenshot we are trying to establish input mapping and output mapping between OData service and the BAPI. So what's the main purpose of this? The main purpose of this is, here we are establishing input mapping and for these things we are establishing output mapping. Whichever fields you want, you can use it. So ultimately, we have to establish input and output mapping between OData service and the BAPI. Because as I said, this left side fields are OData service related fields. Don't forget that. Right side are related to BAPI flight get list now. So left side OData fields, right side BAPI related fields. So between OData and BAPI, we are trying to establish input and output mapping. So let me save it. Very important. Now we have to do this practically here. So to do that, you can just drag drop. You can just drag drop here airline from BAPI to airline ID of OData service. You can drag drop. When you drag drop, you can see we are getting input mapping here, arrow mark. That indicates the data flow. And for output purpose, from flight list, you can select here, drag drop in this case. So you can provide mapping between field to field, between OData and the BAPI related fields. Now, all these things are for output purpose. These fields are for output purpose. So first field is for input and all the remaining fields we are using it for output. Let me take this screenshot also for better understanding. First option, you can use it here as input and the remaining things you can use it for output. You can notice that, and that indicates the data flow between OData and the BAPI. The arrow marks indicates the data flow here. Okay, then, okay, let me write this and save it. Okay, it is saved. Before I proceed, let me write that here. Define input mapping. For that, what you do is left side select icon to select OData field. For example, airline ID for input. Then save it. After that, drag drop airline from BAPI to airline ID of OData service. So that will define input mapping. Now what about output mapping here? From left side, drag drop something like each field from BAPI flight list. Drag drop each field from BAPI flight list to each field of OData service. Just drag drop from right to left. So this is for input purpose, this is for output purpose. If you want, I will repeat this. Here you can say, if you want, you can delete this mapping. You can delete this mapping if required at any point of time. You can just right click and delete. You can delete the mapping. Now I just want to repeat this procedure, so you can right click here, map to data source, provide remote function call, provide BAPI name. Now you'll get left and right combination, left side OData, right side BAPI. And left side I'm selecting one add button here to add one field for input purpose. I want to use one field for input purpose with airline ID. Now you can drag drop airline from BAPI to airline ID of OData service. And for output purpose, you can drag drop the fields from flight list, because flight list node is for output purpose. So you can drag drop for output mapping. Right, so input and output mapping is defined. You can save it. Now what you need to do, step 5. Step 5, we need to generate runtime artifacts. That is, select your project folder, then click on red color icon to generate runtime artifacts. Select continue option, then save it in package or local. In real time, save it in package, then finish. So we have to generate runtime artifacts after maintaining input and output mapping. According to that input and output mapping, the functionality will be auto-generated at OData level and it will access a BAP internally. As per input and output mapping, some code is generated inside OData service automatically and it also will access a BAP internally. So select this project folder, click on red color icon. Now you will get all these runtime artifacts. Just click on continue. Don't change these things. Just click on continue and save it in package. Then proceed further. Now you can see runtime artifacts are generated here. All these runtime artifacts are generated, and not only that, some piece of code is also auto-generated and it also accesses a BAP internally when we execute our service. Okay, so let me write that note here. As per input and output mapping, some piece of code is auto-generated under DPC class. Get entity set method. As per input and output mapping, some functionality is auto-generated under DPC class inside get entity set method. And auto-generated code internally access BAPI which we have consumed, that is BAPI flight get list. So the code is auto-generated according to input and output mapping, and the code also access BAPI flight get list when OData service is executed. So just for knowledge purpose, I am opening that. Generally it's not required to open, but let me open that. I am going to DPC class. So under DPC class, if you closely observe, there is get entity set method here. Let me double click that. Get entity set method. Now you can see internally some piece of code is auto-generated here. Some piece of code is auto-generated according to that mapping which we have maintained in the previous step. And if you closely observe this code, what this code is meant for. This code is meant for accessing a BAPI flight get list by using call function statement, which we used to do it in normal regular app. And it is taking input from airline and it will give output from flight list. So as per mapping, this code is auto-generated and this code will access so-and-so BAPI flight get list by using call function statement. So not only this, several other lines are auto-generated as per this particular service. We are not writing any functionality at OData level because the actual functionality is already available in BAPI. We are just trying to consume and access it. We are not writing the code directly at OData. Instead, the code is already available in BAPI. We are just trying to access that BAPI from OData according to this particular scenario. So where it is auto-generated, it is generated inside get entity set method. This is just for knowledge purpose. I have given this, but you can ignore if you want. Auto-generated code based on input and output mapping. On generating runtime artifacts, this will be generated. Now, don't disturb this. Let me go back. Now, what you need to do, you need to activate a service. You need to activate a service, or I can say you need to register the service. Step 6. Register the service. That is, select service maintenance folder. Select service maintenance folder and double click. And select something like register option. Select register option. You can see here there is service maintenance folder. Double click that. When you double click, now you can see there is a register option and there is error log and there is gateway client. Register is something like you can activate your service inside NetWeaver gateway component. Registering is nothing but like activating your service inside NetWeaver gateway server. Error log, you can trace out the errors. If errors are occurred during service execution, those errors are registered under error log. And to test your service, you can use SAP Gateway Client. So as of now, just let us go with register option here. Just click continue and select system alias local. Select system alias local, then continue and save it in package in real time, then continue again. Don't disturb all these properties, just save it in package and then continue. Now the service is registered and you'll get green color symbol here. You'll get green color symbol, that means service is registered successfully. So double click on service maintenance folder, select register option, select system alias as local in our case, but in real time we can contact administrator for getting system alias. Almost completed now. So after service is registered, step 7, you need to now the last step, that is we need to test the service, that is open gateway client option. Open gateway client is the last step. You can see here. Now you'll get this screen. This screen is just a temporary screen to check whether OData service functionality is working or not. This is not the actual screen. This is just a temporary screen to test the service. The actual screen will be developed using SAP UI5 and Fiori. If the service execution is successful, if the service is valid and properly tested, then we can utilize that service and we can develop actual screens using UI5 theory. Now, let me test this service here, and this is a service URL. You can see this is a service URL. And I want to check what are the fields available, what are the entity sets available. I want to check what are the fields available, what are the entity sets available under this service. Then you can select URI option. You can select URI option and select $metadata. You can select $metadata. That will open the list of fields, it will open the list of entity sets, and it will open the service URL, etc. That information is available when you select this. Metadata, now you can see $metadata we are using. I am selecting execute option, then you'll get the service related details here. You can see you're able to get service related details. You can see entity type and the key field, and what are the other fields. Everything is available here. You can notice that. Whichever fields we have used inside this service, it is trying to show all those fields here in the service document. We call this as a service document, etc., etc. And its data type, you can see that everything is available here. This is technically a service document which will show list of fields, list of entity types, list of entity sets, and the service URL. Not only that, you can see if you scroll down, you'll get the complete service URL. Let me take this screenshot. So here you can see not only fields, not only key field, you are also getting the name of the entity set of this particular service. You can utilize that name of the entity set in the front end to collect and display data. And you can see this is a service URL of that entire service which we have developed, and this can be used in the front end app for consumption. So this service URL, whichever we get here, that can be used in the front end app for developing the actual screens and the actual application. Right, so let me just save it. This is service document. We call it a service document with entity type and service URL. Entity type, fields, entity set, and service URL. Everything will be available when you select $metadata here. Open gateway client, select add URI option, select $metadata, and execute. With this, you'll get like this. So this is to get service document with complete metadata of service. purpose of this is to get the service document with complete metadata of that service. Now, say for example, I want to fetch all records here. I want to fetch all records by executing the service. How to do it? So you can select entity set option. And you can see our entity set is flight set. When you execute the service, the output will come to flight set here. And this we are using, and I'm trying to use get option and execute the service. So if everything is successful, then you will be able to get output records in XML format. You can see American Airlines with a double A. Not only that, you'll get all the other records here. Japan Airlines. You can see Lufthansa Airways. You can see something like Singapore Airlines and etc. United Airlines, you can see that. So we are not providing any input, so we are getting all the output records here under response section. We are getting all output records under response section in XML format by default. So here you can see we are just providing flight set for collecting the output. We are using this. We are selecting get option here and we are executing the service with this particular URL. And because of that, we are getting HTTP response with all records in XML format. You can see that. Airline ID, airline, airport from, city to, price, currency, etc. You can see that, everything. So while testing the service, the output is always displayed by default in XML format. This is just for testing purpose. So this is to fetch all records. You can use this syntax. So in our notes, I'm providing that. But say for example, now I want to fetch records based on filter inputs. I want to fetch records based on filter inputs. So what you can do is you can provide something like question mark dollar filter equal to, for example, airline ID, EQ, for example, LH, Lufthansa Airways I want to get. Select get option, execute the service, then you'll get only those records here. You can see only Lufthansa Airways. Only those records will be fetched here because input airline ID is LH. Or you can try like this, American Airlines, double A. Or you can try this like SQ, Singapore Airlines, UA, United Airlines, etc. So this type of syntax you can use it to fetch records based on filter input. So you can see I'm changing the input airline ID EQ double A, American Airlines I'm expecting. Now you can see we're getting only those records here, American Airlines. So even if you scroll down, you'll get only those records matching with airline ID double A, American Airlines. If I use something like SQ, Singapore Airlines, and you can see on on executing the service, you're getting that respect output, Singapore Airlines SQ. So let me take this final screenshot. This is to fetch records based on input. So here what we are trying to do is we are providing additionally this one. After entity set, we are providing question mark dollar filter equal to airline ID EQ, that is we are providing SQ for Singapore Airlines. So you are getting the respect output here. So just select get option and execute the service. And this is the entity set. Entity set will collect the output here. Entity set will collect output here. Let me close this. Now, so I'll stop here. In the next session, we will proceed further. So this is just first service. In this first service, I made it just very simple by implementing mapping technique. We did not write any functionality, just we are accessing the existing BAPI and we are maintaining a mapping to develop OData service. In the next session, we will discuss the next technique.